Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast. This is another episode of Bolt Breakdowns. I'm your host, Alex Insdorf. I did want to talk a little bit about the 2022 NFL draft that just happened, that just finished. I hope everyone had a fun time watching the draft at home. I know Steven, Tyler, and Arjun had a fantastic time going to the draft, which is something I'd like to do in the future. But today we're not going to be talking necessarily, well, we will be talking about the players the Chargers drafted. But I wanted to make a video talking about stock up, stock down for the Chargers who were already on the roster prior to the draft, and what those draft picks have kind of done to some of the players' futures on the roster. So we will be doing our draft grades episode tomorrow, where we grade each pick and grade the Chargers draft. Very excited to do that. I'm sure I'll show Isaiah Spiller some love, as people have noticed on Twitter. But in the grand scheme of things, I did think the Chargers had a pretty good draft and filled a lot of positions of need. Specifically, the trenches, I thought was a really great aspect of their draft because they've never really gone that hard at addressing the trenches before on both sides of the ball, especially when you consider the Atudo Ogbonya pick in the 5th round. So I think that's, an interesting direction for them to go, a trench heavy draft, when I did expect a lot more corners, edge, high premium defensive positions to take it. So we'll talk about all of that when we do grade the draft tomorrow. But let's get to this stock up, stock down for the Chargers who were currently on the roster. And I will get to that now. Let me know, of course, in the comments below what you guys think of the Chargers draft. I think that I always love to hear what the fans think a little bit. And so maybe drop your grade below down in the comments for what you would give the Chargers draft. But let's get to this stock up, stock down Chargers after the 2022 draft. I think when you talk about stock up, you have to talk about Michael Davis. This is something that I didn't necessarily expect. Obviously, we've talked about Michael Davis on the show in the sense of his contract, right? He has a very cuttable contract next year. The Chargers can save something like $7 million by cutting him. They brought in J.C. Jackson, obviously paid him a lot of money, have Asante as sort of like that other outside corner right now. And so Michael Davis is someone whose role has kind of been in jeopardy in that standard box outside corner. And if the Chargers were to have drafted Trent McDuffie, like Daniel Popper had in one of his mock drafts, or if they got a really playable corner, like a Kobe Bryant, for example, in the 3rd or 4th round, then I think that Michael Davis's role this year would be in jeopardy, and he would have to have a competition for that. But now Michael Davis is very clearly an important member of the 2022 Chargers. He doesn't have to compete for his time in a sense. He will be a necessity in 2022, and people can feel about that however, whatever way they want. I don't know what this means for his future in 2023, considering the contract situation, but Michael Davis has absolutely made himself very important to the 2022 Chargers, especially because they didn't really take a playable premium corner in the round 1 to 4. They did end up taking Jasir Taylor from Wake Forest, so that's more of a special teams pick at this point, though, and they'll see how he develops over the years, kind of a long-term project a little bit there. But Michael Davis is very clearly, his stock is on the rise after the 2022 draft, and we'll see where it goes from here if he is actually able to lock down a spot on the 2023 Chargers despite his contract, maybe. Stock down. Pretty significant stock down, I would say, for Joshua Kelley and Larry Roundtree. Obviously, the Chargers drafted Joshua Kelley in the 4th round of 2020, drafted Larry Roundtree in the 6th round of 2021. And despite picking 2 running backs in back-to-back years on day 3, they tripled down on that again, and they took Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M. Now, I do think Isaiah Spiller is a different kind of pick than Joshua Kelley and Larry Roundtree were. The value was very clearly there for Spiller, was someone who was projected to go at the end of round 2, potentially, the beginning of round 3, and you get him middle of round 4. Just from a draft board standpoint, I thought Joshua Kelley was a reach. I thought Larry Roundtree was a little bit of a reach. So the value for Isaiah Spiller was absolutely better. But this is a pretty direct indictment on both of these players and how they fared to this point. Joshua Kelley obviously had that really good start to 2020, but just has faltered since, has not been able to kind of get his confidence and vision back as a runner. There will probably still be a spot for one of these guys as it pertains to the roster. I think one of these guys very clearly will be RB3, probably leaning towards Larry Roundtree there because of his special teams value and the fact that the new coaching administration was specifically the one that drafted him in terms of Brandon Staley. So I kind of think they'll lean more towards the Brandon Staley pick than the Anthony Lynn pick. But that's all kind of hearsay until we hear, until we see training camp unfold and the preseason unfold. Obviously, guys can win and lose spots on such thin margins. But Isaiah Spiller is very clearly the Chargers running back 2. There was a chance prior to the draft that one of these guys could have been RB2. We heard Brandon Staley sort of talk down the free agent class of running backs, not something they were really interested in. But the Chargers going really aggressive the beginning of day 3 with, pretty much their last premium pick of the draft and taking Isaiah Spiller is a pretty direct indictment and definitely a stock down for Joshua Kelley and Larry Roundtree, and both their futures as Chargers and both their futures as any, potential RB2 scenario. I think that we can call that dream as good as dead. Stock up Trey Pipkins. Going into the draft, and we even did the round 2 and 3 draft stream. I did it with Kyle, Dinaman and Catania, and we were sort of talking about when the Chargers should draft an offensive tackle. And, we kept seeing the guys go off the board. Oh, there goes Abraham Lucas. Oh, there goes Bernard Ryman, right? So at the 3rd round, it was like there were still some guys for the Chargers to take, but the value wasn't quite as juicy as tackle that you could get at that point, someone who's playable. And so the Chargers really, in terms of their tackle situation right now, yes, Jamari Salyer has played some tackle at Georgia, but in terms of the guys who are going to be starting for the Chargers next year, it's very clearly between Trey Pipkins, Storm Norton, and I would probably throw a free agent veteran into the mix. I do still think they pursue that option. I don't know if it'll be someone like Riley Reiff, who I think would just kind of shoe into right tackle, and then we're talking stock down on Trey Pipkins, but at this point, I do think they are kind of leaning towards Trey Pipkins based on the Kansas City game from last year. Obviously played pretty well in that despite getting some help, but did show relative improvement from the last time he was a starter along the offensive line. So I think based on the Chargers not drafting any natural offensive tackles like an Abraham Lucas, like Bernard Raymond, like a Trevor Penning in the 1st round, like a lot of the discussion was heading into the draft from various mock drafts. I think a lot of people had them high on Penning. They passed on Penning to go take Zion Johnson. And so I think that really opened the door towards Trey Pipkins starting. You could make an argument for Storm Norton winning a competition too, but I think they do at this point based on that Kansas City game last year, based on the improvement they've seen, and really also based on the fact that I don't think they can throw Storm Norton out there again. I think that's stock up more so for Trey Pipkins at this point. Stock down. Let's talk about Gabe Neighbors. So the Chargers end up taking Xander Horvath with their last pick in the draft. Super athletic fullback, sort of a do-it-all fullback a little bit. He's a fullback, running back, tight end. Who does that kind of sound like? Actually, that kind of sounds like Gabe Neighbors when they had him as a undrafted free agent in 2020, and he was competing with Bobby Holly at the time for a spot on the roster. And they sort of wanted him in that versatile fullback tight end role. Neighbors occasionally would show flashes here and there, but never really panned out to much. And 2021, Gabe Neighbors was a healthy scratch for a lot of games. So the Chargers going with someone like Xander Horvath isn't super surprising. I did think it being, their last pick in the draft as opposed to like an undrafted free agent, like that shows the kind of urgency maybe they had for the position. And, the fact that Horvath was still there was something that they like. So last year they carried 4 tight ends, including Steven Anderson, and then 1 fullback, including Gabe Neighbors. I think you're more likely to see 3 tight ends this year between Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, and Trey McKitty, and then 1 fullback or 1 running back / fullback / tight end in Xander Horvath. And I'm really curious to see how they use him as a blocker, because he is a nasty blocker, and how they use him in the receiving game as well. And I think he gives you a lot more versatility than Gabe Neighbors, even though back in the day, that was kind of Gabe Neighbors' selling point. It just hadn't panned out to that point yet. And let's talk about stock up. I think Chris Rumph got a huge stock up in the draft. Me, Tyler, and Steven were talking endlessly about edge rusher, possibilities. I think we knew that they weren't going to take an edge in the first round simply because the value wasn't there anymore after, all the guys like Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson and really everyone came off the board for the Chargers at a edge or wide receiver position very early. So that was never a possibility by the time the Chargers got on the board at 17 and they end up taking Zion Johnson, which we all loved. But I think that we did sort of say like, okay, well, day 2, day 3, there's still a chance you get like an edge player, someone that could contribute, maybe an Iloma Uwuzurike. You can get really some guy in there that I think can contribute kind of immediately. But then obviously in round 3, they decided to go with JT Woods, boost the secondary, give Derwin and Adderley some help in that secondary rotation, right? And then, of course, day 3, the beginning of that, they take Isaiah Spiller. So it very clearly all the edge, value that there would have been dried up off the board. And so now the Chargers are in a position where you have Khalil Mack and have Joey Bosa, and that's what Brandon Staley wants, right? He wants his 2 edge rushers at all times. But for Joey Bosa, a guy that does have some concussion problems or has had a reoccurring history of those, and for Khalil Mack, who was injured for a large portion of last season, you're kind of betting now on Chris Rumph, Emeka Egbale, a lot of the guys that they have behind those 2 at edge. Specifically, Chris Rumph, I think, is very clearly edge 3 now, unless they sign somebody else. So, I'm a little bit hesitant to accept this one because Chris Rumph kind of was up and down for large portions of the preseason and the season last year when he played. Had a couple good flashes, but I'm a little bit hesitant to accept him in the edge 3 role for something that's such a premium position in considering the injury histories of Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack as well. But the coaching staff, by not taking an edge in this draft, I think has shown that they really believe in him to be that edge 3 guy right now. And this is the last stock down, but I do think we have to talk about Jerry Tillery. This isn't really because the Chargers drafted UCLA's Otito Ogbonya in the 5th round. That, although, in a sense, that could kind of contribute to what we're talking about. Just another defensive tackle in the fray. He's more in that nose tackle kind of build, though. So he doesn't really kick Jerry Tillery off the roster. But shortly after the draft concluded, after the Chargers did draft another defensive tackle body, the Chargers declined the 5th-year option on Jerry Tillery. And then kind of tried to do some mixed messaging where they declined the option, but then said, oh, well, he's still in our long-term plans. We have, big plans for Jerry Tillery this year, but you're not willing to pay $10 million for him in 2023. So kind of call bullshit there. So for me, I think the loser of the weekend does kind of have to be Jerry Tillery based on the fact that, he is going to start the season now that he's really their only true pure pass rushing DT, which is a little bit of a scary sentence that just came out of my mouth, right? Obviously, you have Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson as your sort of tweeners in between a nose tackle and defensive tackle. And then you have Otito Ogbonya, who sort of slots in as your nose or the Linval Joseph replacement that people have talked about. But Jerry Tillery not having his 5th-year option picked up, and the Chargers obviously trading with the Bears to get their 6th-round pick back to have more ammunition next year. They're not going to be players in free agency with the limited cap space that they have next year now. But I do think in terms of replacing Jerry Tillery, I think that's a process that's kind of already begun, obviously by declining the 5th-year option. And, he could ball out this year, but as Kyle DiDomenico pointed out, new member of the GAC podcast family, if he does ball out, it actually kind of makes more sense to let him walk in free agency and pick up a good compensatory pick rather than re-sign him with the somewhat limited cap space the Chargers have. So I think that'll be a very interesting thing to watch. But for 2023, for even the immediate future, I think Jerry Tillery's future with the Chargers looks pretty murky at best, and that they try to replace him probably early in the draft next year, or they find some kind of value free agent option to take his place. But that is it for my stock up, stock down options on the 2022 Chargers draft. Let me know if there's any other ideas that you're thinking. Let me know how you graded the Chargers draft. Let me know in the comments down below. Are there any other Chargers whose jobs are at risk as a result of the 2022 draft. So that is all for today, and I